Hello, welcome to another Gamasutra video interview. Today I'm talking to Simon Roth, who is currently making Maia, which you might have seen on Kickstarter a little while back. So what we should probably do to start, Simon, if you would not mind, is sort of describe generally who you are and what your background in games is and what this game is that we can see right here.
Okay, well, I'm Simon Roth, as has been stated. My background in games is mixed. I trained as a computer animator,
Mhm.
or I'd already trained as a computer animator when I went to university to learn to be a computer animator. So I found the course quite boring, so I decided to learn to code, and yeah, kind of took off from there. So
Yeah.
I'm a kind of a multi. Uh, I don't know, well, a technical artist, I think is the term, but I'm also more of a programmer. And yeah,
Okay.
and I worked on VBV with Terry Kavanagh to turn it into like a PC game rather than a Flash game, which it used to be.
Yeah.
And I worked at Natural Motion for a bit on their animation tech that went into like Grand Theft Auto and stuff. And I worked at Frontier quite abortively. And I also, but I did work there for like 2 years, so it's not.
Yeah.
I worked on Connectimals, which we
Okay.
shipped, and that was actually for a kids game. It was very well regarded.
Yeah,
Um,
it was awesome. I enjoyed that one.
yeah, well, if you make a kids game well, it can be a good game, like kids TV series.
Oh
But
yeah.
anyway, yeah, I'm going off the point. And then I worked at Mode 7. But the thing was, when I was at Frontier in Mode 7, I was also doing a doctorate in fancy computer graphic stuff. But it was just like too much work, and it just destroyed me mentally. So
Hmm.
I ended up like quitting my doctorate, leaving Mode 7 in a bit of a messy situation. Um, Although we're cool with it now. I mean, yeah, you can go drinking and stuff, so it's cool. Um, but yeah, and then yeah, this is my game Maya, which is my kind of new thing, I
Yeah, so
guess.
I mean, as if people are watching or if they're aware of this already, they'll probably be getting a bit of a sort of old school bullfrog vibe from it. I mean, I'm guessing that's what you were going for. Why? What I'm kind of interested in is why do you think no one has really been doing this much before? Because there's been a few games that have sort of done the Dungeon Keeper-esque style thing, but for how sort of popular those games were back then, you'd think there'd be loads more of them going around. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think there is kind of a limited market,
Hmm.
and the market is actually slightly older people. I mean, Dungeon Keeper was incredibly rude. Um, when you actually go, wait a sec, this is a dominatrix, and she's getting whipped, and she's going to
Yeah.
get whipped in this room. This is actually not for kids, you know. Um, but like I found, like with the Kickstarter, is a lot of my market slightly older and Northern European and a mixed gender. And
Okay.
I think in the mid 2000s, the whole all games are for boys. Let's market all video games to men with generic brown hair and slightly bit of stubble and all that crap.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that kind of killed the love of those games, I guess,
Yeah.
and the whole AAA broad markets and all that stuff. You can make a game like this and it can sell like great for like a medium tier or whatever.
Hmm.
But if it's not going to make 100 million, then it's not worth making.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really sad because there's plenty of room for kind of games that only make 1 million. You know,
Yeah. Only a million. Yeah.
I mean, you probably saw already, but I mentioned in terms of funding
Mm.
between Kickstarter, Indiegogo, direct alpha sales, and Steam, we're well over $500,000 already.
Yeah. It's
And
amazing.
like for an alpha, that's kind of just like obscene.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there is a market for it, and the market's huge. It's just not as huge as EA would like it to be, or whatever. And EA bought up all the interesting licenses as well. Um, and all the licenses which did exist got pulled over to mobile games. And there's a Dungeon Keeper mobile game that's absolutely atrocious.
Yeah. I've seen that. Yeah.
Um, I'm
So
not.
what made you want to make like a Dungeon Keeper style game then?
Well, this is interesting because Maia came out of the death of another game,
Yeah.
But actually, to explain it, I have to get even further back. When I was at Natural Motion, we were all obsessed with playing Dwarf Fortress, and I really struggled to get into it. So I'd actually like watch my friend playing it more than I'd play it, because when I tried to play it, things would go terribly wrong incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
But I went, I should make Dwarf Fortress, but with like graphics, and it should be like in full 3D with these like the cubes of the world could just be like cubes in 3D, and you could like dig them out.
Yeah.
And I basically explained Minecraft, and I sat around the table, and all the people from Natural Motion and my friend Tom, who was also interning there at that time with me, they went, "That's a fucking terrible idea. No one would ever buy that game. It sounds horrible. Why would anyone play that when they can play Dwarf Fortress?" And I was like, "Oh, okay then." So instead, for my BA, I made a really, really fancy tech demo of a game that didn't really exist behind it, but obviously tech demos are great for your kind of graduate show reels. And so that game never got made, but I wanted to make a game with kind of voxels and stuff, and I was making this huge world game, and I was trying to build the game into it. But I basically sat down and I went, actually, there's no game here. And I was working with Terry at the time on VVV, and I kind of saw what proper game design's supposed to be like, and then immediately went, "Oh right, okay, yeah. The problem is I need to start thinking about putting a game together, because, and stop forgetting about like building worlds is great, but you really have to have a game behind it." And so I kind of started coming up with this idea of how I could turn it into this kind of game like The Sims or something like that, with all this depth, and maybe this could be an alien world and you're landing there and it's like that. And then I went, that all sounds a lot of effort in a really fancy 3D world. What if I just made it out of blocks? And when, you know what, it could be isometric, and the game was kind of isometric. Actually, I have sketches of some of my first stuff around somewhere. Yeah, that kind of, and then going, I'll go back to making a game. What's interesting is at the same time, when I was working with Terry, me and Terry went to the pub with Cambridge Indies, and Chris DeLay from Introversion was there.
Yeah.
And I was having this conversation about like cancelling kind of a game where I can't see the fun in it and stuff. And he was just like sitting there silently, kind of nodding along, and then like weeks later they cancelled Subversion, and announced Prison Architect, and I was like, oh no, I feel really bad now, because I was saying all this stuff and he's sitting there silently, and they'd either cancelled it or they'd either just cancelled it or were about to cancel it. And so in retrospect, that's like a really weird kind of series of events, and kind of especially, but it's really cool. I actually really like Prison Architect, but I haven't got it on Steam yet because I can't allow myself to, because I'll just play the crap out of it and not get anything done. So yeah, well, the game hasn't crashed so far, actually. This is something I'm really pleased with.
Yeah, it's going well up to now.
Yeah, and the colonists appear, well, I don't know what they're doing, although you've kind of blocked every door with piles of minerals that your imps
I wasn't really thinking about that, really, was I? Yeah, the game just crashed, but it's okay, we're back again. It's actually, that's one thing, actually, it's maybe a good thing it happened, because what I did want to ask you, so one idea is that you've essentially come onto Steam Early Access with this, what you're calling a sort of very early alpha build. It's a sort of, what do you call it? You call it a proof of concept, essentially. I mean, what were the thoughts behind that? Was it that you essentially wanted to be getting people's feedback from very early on?
Yeah, because I think a lot of developers, they work in echo chambers, and you can assume all these things are working and great and stuff, but at the end of the day, unless it's in the hands of players, you can never know. And as long as I of course I'm worried about releasing a kind of very early game, but at the same time, as long as I was open about it, I'd be happy. Like as long as no one's misled and think they're getting 12 hours of gameplay,
Yeah.
then that's all right. And I'm always accessible, so you can tweet me from the Steam page. Like there's a link, and there's a link to the IRC chat, which I sit in all day.
Okay.
So if someone pops up and goes, "Should I buy this? I want this," I can either go, "That's not ready for you yet," or "Yeah, you'd enjoy it now." And yeah, as I said, like there were 40 patches, we're probably approaching about 45 patches now in the last week, which I've put out, which are things which some of them are bug fixes, like the crash fixes, but a lot of it is actually things that were not immediately obvious to people, but were immediately obvious to me or the testers or the Kickstarter backers, because they've kind of they've had the game in their hands for a few months, so they're kind of used to it and they know what to expect. Getting it in front of fresh eyes, immediately things pop up and you feel like an idiot for never having done that. And also some of the there are jokes in the game which you might not get, and some actually break the game for you. So at the beginning of the tutorial, every of the one of the pop-ups says press Y to continue, and then the last one it says press the OK button. And it was just a little joke to check that they're kind of awake. But I have 60 bug reports of that. I can't exit the last page of this tutorial. All of the previous ones were Y, and I don't have an OK button on my keyboard. And I'm like,
that's amazing.
But kind of
that's so good.
Things like that, and kind of like the way that interaction works and placing stuff. One thing that I've noticed is you can rotate by you click and you drag.
Yeah.
That isn't obvious to people. People click and then they go, "How do I rotate it?" And I'm like, "Did you click and drag?" And they're like, "Oh, that was really obvious." And because I also made the camera rotation on Alt, and a lot of games do this, like strategy games. They put kind of, you hold down Alt, move the mouse, and the camera rotates. And that's actually probably because Maia does this, the 3D software Maia, as opposed to my game, and like lots of 3D software does that to rotate a camera around a point in 3D. But a lot of people immediately went, "Why is that not on mouse middle button?" And I'm like, "Oh, it could be on mouse middle button, couldn't it?" And then kind of put that in, and that was something blatantly obvious to a lot of people, but not to us because we get blinkered. So since I have open development, releasing early just lets us get all those silly things out of the way. Because a lot of people have said, "How could you do open development?" Because obviously, all these people are going to have terrible ideas, and you're going to have to somehow.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually. I mean, yeah, do you have to sort of find some kind of balance between, okay, these are cool ideas, and you know what, I'm probably just going to stick to my own plans right now?
Generally speaking, people actually don't come up with ideas. Most people's input is to do with things that are broken in the interface, or their expectations of the interface.
Yeah.
And kind of things like that, and things about some of the ways that things are working. It's never actually in a big overarching games design ideas, or in the way that I've implemented some stuff. It's usually, or like say the simulation systems. The people who do have ideas for that usually tell me things that I've actually already planned, which is good, because I know that they've picked up on my stream of thoughts and can actually carry it on themselves. Or they come up with something that's a bit off tangent, but because of it's a bit off tangent, I explain why I'm not doing that. And what it does is actually shores up my game design, because it allows me to, or it forces me to justify everything that I'm doing. So everything has to get everything has to stand the test of the Kickstarter backers, of the Indiegogo backers, of the Steam early access people, of my own testers and on my own team and my own tests. And so everything is, nothing slips through the gaps. Well, stuff slips through the gaps, but there are no huge kind of obvious things that you sit down and go, "Why did that happen?" Because everything's double checked several times.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is obviously there's self-selection in the community of the people who will talk about things. But at the same time, journalists can do their early access previews, and we've actually mostly everyone's been incredibly positive about it, and they can see where it's going. But the ones that have had niggles, that I've actually, I've gone, okay, this is an issue. I can actually go and fix that. So there's no like, oh, do the whole game, release it, and then everyone goes, oh, what have you done? Like, um, and
Yeah.
I'm not arrogant enough to think that I'm going to make the perfect game. And I think a lot of developers can sometimes be like that. And
Mm.
there's one thing having an artistic vision and going ahead with it, which is what I am doing. But a lot of people think that they like have to work in a complete vacuum creatively,
Yeah.
which is just nonsense. Like I'm very keen to mention games that I'm inspired by. And what's actually interesting is a lot of people assume that when I say I'm inspired by Dwarf Fortress, they mean I'm copying Dwarf Fortress. Or I'm inspired by Dungeon Keeper, I'm copying the mechanics of Dungeon Keeper. Which is kind of odd. And the reason why is I've realized that few games developers really talk about their inspirations as things like really what they're inspired by. They talk about the things that they're copying. When I don't want to name names because it sounds kind of like I'm being rude about people's creative processes. But say Mass Effect, they go, "Oh, we're inspired by 70s sci-fi," and I go, "No, you're not. You're putting blue lens flares on stuff, and you're copying a few of the design aesthetics. You're not building your world based on having like kind of a kind of lower level kind of understanding of the medias that they're drawing from. They're kind of pulling very high level. Here's what a space car should look like. Here's what a spaceship should what and kind of here's our laser guns or whatever, or here's our sexy woman costume that we've taken from this 70s sci-fi. It's like, no, that's not really actually how that works.
So when it comes to like your Kickstarters, because this is one thing I always wonder about sort of people who have taken on like large scale Kickstarters like you have. Does it feel like you have sort of more pressure on you as a result of it, or is it more like that people are interested in this concept, and so therefore that like worry in your head is sort of put to bed?
Yeah, it is kind of put to bed, and that's kind of every time I put out a big release and things, that's kind of gets rid of like this crushing pain in my brain.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the other reasons why I haven't mentioned why we did the Steam release, is because if you want to do something creatively, the worst thing that you can have is a deadline, and a really crushing deadline, something like a Steam release that is going to be the most stressful event in the development process.
Yeah.
So if you can do that first, and then everything afterwards, after the kind of 3 weeks of madness, of releasing something, after that, you can just go, I'm just going to be creative. And I think that's something that you can see in maybe Kerbal Space Program. They don't have these crushing deadlines now, and so they can be creative and they can put stuff in as that goes. And because the original Kerbal Space Program was literally just like get this rocket ship to orbit, and that was the game. And then there were planets, and then there's this, and now there's a single player campaign. And now, like yesterday, they announced that they've got a multiplayer going in. I don't even know how they're going to do that.
No.
So I'm not really interested in their multiplayer, but sounds cool anyway.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, just having it out there, and things like not having the pressure of kind of having to court the press. People can dip in at any point and go, here's the game at its current state. Let's have a look at it. Let's write about it. Like Rock Paper Shotgun. Adam Smith had a look at it at Rezzed. I wasn't displaying it there. I just had a copy with me, and he went, "Oh yeah, check it out," and had a go, and he can write about it then. But there's no kind of like, here's the deadline for when we need to get all the press, and if we don't get this amount of money by this time, we're all going to be kind of living on the street and things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it that way before.
Well, there's plenty of ways to think about it. It's okay. I
Oh,
justify.
I bet they've all gone through your head. Yeah. Excellent. Right. Well, I think we're coming to the end. I mean, what are your sort of plans then from now? Have you got like a fixed time? I know you're just saying no deadlines, but have you got some kind of
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah.
timeline in your head?
So we've got a roadmap which we've put
Yeah.
up on most of the forums, and that kind of pushes us into early next year. Is when we nail down the sandbox gameplay.
Okay.
That's kind of the basic research, the base building all the stuff, and getting your colonists interacting, getting the ecosystem simulating. So we've got all these different creatures that are going to be living outside, and those are all being concepted now, and the graphics kind of going in for them. And then kind of so midway by next year, we're going to be well into having the things like the voiceover and the more complex stuff like the campaign. And after that, it's really dependent on what sort of money we've got coming in at that point. Once we've finished off everything kind of promised in the Kickstarter and the Indiegogo, as to whether we continue producing like free content, because I'm very keen on keeping on the keep producing the game. There's so much more that I want to go into it, but I kind of have drawn walls in my head to ensure that we don't have crazy feature creep and things, which is very easy with a very kind of open game like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, midway next year, that will be when we'll be like signing off 1.0.
Yeah.
And that will be the kind of not so final release, hopefully.
Excellent. Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Right.
Somewhat.
Well, yeah. I will leave it there, I guess. So thanks very much for your time,
Yeah,
and
good speaking to you.
I'll definitely be keeping track of this and seeing what builds on top of it, because I do love myself a bit of Dungeon Keeper. So I'm thinking this is going to be for me as well. Right. Well, if anybody wants to check it out, it is on Steam Early Access at the moment. So go and do so right now. Bye.
Bye.